Welcome, everybody. I know it's kind of small right now. I'm hoping more people will trickle in, but let's get started so that we can have some of the discussions that we need to have and get back home and not in the humidity. So welcome, everybody. That's my welcome. That was a whole 3 minutes. So last meeting, I believe it was, we had a couple people that asked for, how are we aligning what we're doing with the strategic plan? And so I really just wanted to briefly talk about what the strategic plan says and what the responsibilities of this particular committee are in regards to that. So strategic plan goal for equity, diversity, and inclusion. Students and staff agree that their school worksite is an inclusive, equitable, and diverse place where they have a strong sense of belonging and connectedness. Outcome by 2027, students and staff report in biannual surveys 90% or higher agreement that their school worksite is an inclusive place where they have a strong sense of belonging and connectedness. And so I looked through to see the strategies and the responsible parties and such, and I found only one that the E.D.I committee is responsible for, and I looked through all of them. But under strategy 4.1, ensure that all schools establish staff equity teams and that all secondary schools establish student equity teams. And then the tactic, it's the 1, 2, 3, tell me I did, there, second one down. Build out system-wide shared language definition of equity. And so based on that and based on the fact that there is that definition on the website, it seems as though that particular item has been accomplished according to the strategic plan. So now my question for all y'all is, what now? Just that broad. What now? What is going to be the purpose of this committee moving forward? And what does that look like? What does the makeup look like? What does that look like? So I just wanted kind of feedback from everybody else to kind of see where y'all's heads were at and what kinds of thoughts you had.
Yeah. I would say we're kind of have student voice under our umbrella too, which is not shown in the strategic plan, of course.
Right.
Because you're specifically asking what this committee should be doing.
Correct.
And according to the strategic plan, you said we already did the definition for equity?
Equity. District-wide, I believe.
What number was that? I'm sorry. I'm just trying to keep up.
You're okay. I know I did go pretty quickly. Hang on. I screenshotted it because it's...
We have a strategic.
It's under, so goal 4, strategy 4.1.
Cool, thank you.
And the second one down, the first tactic, but second one down. Does the student voice fall under the committee or does it fall under the department is the question.
Could you repeat that statement?
Does the student voice fall under this committee or does it fall under the department of E.D.I?
Well,
That's I'm asking because I don't know.
say the committee falls under EDI, therefore student voice does.
Well, I would assume that it would be that we work with everyone, but our point of contact has been,
So it is,
and has always been Malcolm, where we've been working closely with him, and then that's what allows us to be in this setting. So I think the collective group is what we would all be working with, but still Malcolm.
so make sure I'm saying what you're
Yeah.
saying is yes, that the student voices does fall under the EDI board committee, but with me as the SME for the EDI board committee, I operate as that for you and I operate as the SME.
Correct.
In the direct line of communication to student voices.
Correct.
So I know that there was a big concern with, we come to these meetings, and this was directly from a member who I don't believe is here this evening. We come to these meetings, we sit, we listen, we go home. What are we doing? I feel that, like I'm part of a couple other committees and they're going into the schools and they're evaluating things and they're putting on parent forums and they're doing what they, they're they're doing. So what are we as a committee doing is really the question. What is the plan?
And then I would also like to say a lot of these say Office of E.D.I, and I know at the time we made them, we didn't even have an Office of E.D.I, but it was with the intention that the Office of E.D.I was going to be more than one singular person. So I do feel that there's perhaps room for us to take some of the items that do say Office of E.D.I, because we were being very vague with that,
Okay.
and maybe redelegating those to our committee.
So we would have to sit down and look through all of those and kind of see where there's actionable items for
Yes.
this committee to do. And that's something that we can do. I don't have them up, but that's something that we can discuss for sure.
And I think that would be something we can intentionally set a nice chunk of time for our next committee meeting, for that to be really just more, that first part, a workshop of really just realigning EDI to just kind of match the efforts and the intentions of the district now.
Haven't you started visiting the schools?
Could you please speak a little louder? I'm having trouble hearing.
Yes, ma'am, I apologize. So I was just saying right now, just moving forward, did you want to come over
Please
here?
slide closer. Let's
Got
be
any donuts?
inclusive here. That's what we're talking about.
This is the inclusion.
I can bring up another example of something that it was a program that we kind of established. There was student voice that was championed and established
Yes,
through this
here,
committee.
yeah.
The heritage language course that was established and championed through this committee and rolled out. There was a couple other things. Let me see if I can grab them. But that's kind of an example of like the actionable thing, to your point of here's what we can bring to the schools, and certain programs, things like that can be helpful.
I agree, and along with that, maybe closing some feedback loops. So for instance, I remember Hugh, you were the person who brought it to our attention that not every school actually had an equity team. And so we have put it in that this committee would be pushing that agenda forward, but in terms of closing feedback loops, does every school now have an equity team? And how do we know? So one service that we could provide to the district as a set of listening ears is to get feedback from each of the equity teams at all schools and get a sense, a pulse of where people are at in the district, but also begin to look at some of those metrics that were laid out in the strategic plan. So the superintendent is probably looking at those metrics. Other administrative team members are looking at those metrics. What about community members? And could we, as a team of community members and educators, begin to talk about, here's the message we might want to take back to the schools, or here's the message we might want to distribute throughout New Hanover County based on what's going on here? Because, Ms. Mason, I think you were really astute to mention we now have a definition of equity, and we didn't, right? But the question is, what does it look like when that's happening, and to what degree is our definition being met across the district? Denise, I loved your message today. I don't know if you got a chance to see it, because
we were in a meeting all
I
day.
mean, here's the deal. Wheelchair access is equity, right? How are we doing on wheelchair access throughout the district? Assistive technologies that allow children with special education supports to access the curriculum fully, that's equity. How are we doing on that?
And you bring up a really great point, because then recognize one thing that's always repeated is equity, diversity, inclusion belongs to every division and it belongs to every stakeholder. So when that email, for example, I think now just being intentional, if those are concerns and those things are going to make the agenda, that in advance we invite the subject matter expert, because though I am diversity, equity, inclusion, transportation and operations, who handles all of our facilities, has a more robust knowledge of what those metrics are and where are we at in ensuring that, because we could have met it. So I do think that's just something now, before we leave each meeting, just having that last 5 minutes, what's our task? Who do we need to invite? And, that's something I just want to hold myself personally accountable for, to making sure that we do that, so those subject matter experts can be here, which will come in again during my EDI report, that point will be made again, so.
Brilliant.
Ms. Dino?
I really appreciate this discussion, and thank you to the folks who read, and I know the rest of you, I'm sure, will after the meeting when you have a chance to read the email. I do have a question that I think is pertinent. Also in the strategic plan, we were mandated by the state to increase our inclusion by 10%. And I personally, and I don't know anybody who's getting data on this, what the plan is to increase inclusion, what areas are we working on, what data do we have to show progress. That's a request. I think I made it a while back. I'm not sure who, because I'm talking to everybody who listen, and I appreciate you guys so much. But that would be very helpful, and tell me if I'm wrong, but I think it's the purview of this committee, no? Because equity, diversity, inclusion?
So yeah, which goes back to what I was saying. So for what you're talking about, inclusion, if I read your email correctly, we talk about what related to sports and athletics. So that's when, being the DEI person here, we do have to reach out to student support services, because they will be able to, either we reach out to invite them in, or we point you in that direction to go to establish that communication, that conversation with them. So it will be either they come in, or we'll just have to give you that direction of where to go, because again, everything at some point connects or comes through DEI, but I don't want to sit here and give you wrong information and not being prepared for your questions. So I do, even at the end, is what task, who do we need to reach out to, and also who do I need to connect you with. So I'll send an email connecting you to that person to give you the answer, because I know for me, I wouldn't be that fountain. So thank you for lifting that.
My question would be, were you referring to the athletics, or were you referring to general inclusion of students within the population?
It's where we were, SEPTA was in communication for almost a year with some wonderful folks within the school system, and we understood that there was unified track throughout middle school and high school. That was one of our goals, and we understood that that goal had been met, and that the members of the athletic department, coaches, and members of the EC department were meeting, and the EC department was going to provide support and information as far as how to make rules accessible if they're in written form for kids who maybe have a learning disability or dyslexia. It was, a lot of things were discussed, and we were assured that there were conversations, that there was professional development actually going on around this. Around December, one of the members of our inclusion committee reported back to us that parents were unaware that there was now unified track throughout New Hanover County, and in fact, we had never seen any communications or emails going out anywhere, and parents were not receiving information through their schools. And upon further investigation, we found that folks had no awareness, and to their knowledge, there was no. Or maybe, I'm trying to be as accurate as I can be. Perhaps at Ashley High School and one or two other schools. But throughout the district, at every middle and high school, no. So we reached out to Mr. Lewis, the athletic director, for information, clarification, and I'm sorry to say we never heard back. So here I am, speaking about this now, really coming to you guys for help and guidance about, first, how we can get information about what is actually going on at each of the middle and high schools. And it doesn't have to be the same. We just are, and unified track is really something that's so easy to do. It's very simple to make this happen. It just requires a little bit of logistics and people having a conversation, but the actual putting it into process and making it happen, we have models from other school districts where it's been in place for quite some time, And, you know, we're New Hanover County, we don't have to do it, we do it the way we can do it, but there's plenty of data and models out there for us, or we can, you know, invent our own. And so where we are now is literally no information, like we're talking now. Just this is exactly the topic. How do we find out what's going on in the different schools, and where can we support? We're not here to make demands. SEPTA's not here to make demands. We are willing to work with you guys wherever and however. We have an amazing group of very skilled people, some professionals, retired and present educators, and folks with degrees in social work. And so we're well equipped to support, and it's just, we couldn't even get any information. Yes, it's happening at these schools, we're working on it at those schools, it's already in place. And so that's, without taking up too much of your very valuable time, that's about it.
Thank you.
And I'll supplement that, because your question was on academics,
Right.
or sports, and so SEPTA's been really engaged on the sports side. I will say, and some of you who've been here for quite a while may remember this, from the academic side, I brought inclusion in a not segregated classroom. I'm not thinking of the right word.
Integrated?
Yeah, general ed. I brought up mainstream. Mainstream. Yeah. So our ratio in New Hanover County School for in 2021, I brought this to the committee. Our ratio was like 53%. State target is 65%. So 10% at least, you know, behind our goal. And we did have some activity around that. We met with Mr. O'Brien for quite some time and Dr. Jones, but with the turnover, all that good work has been lost. And so we had some good progress on co-teaching best practices, and like how can we take some pilots that have been implemented for, I want to say, Myrtle Grove Middle School, and prepare elementary school students so that they can do it in middle school, and kind of start to champion that. And with the turnover, it kind of, like, I couldn't get any more traction, not because people don't want to help, of course, it's just people are very busy, and trying to be have the right connections has been a challenge. So that could absolutely be something we pick up again now that we have, you know, some visibility on, like, okay, how do we connect and how do we make that space for it? And
I
maybe
really
there's some
like what you're
time
saying.
with the summer staff that, you know, the staff that does stay on in the summer can help support and kind of get started for the new year. I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, I didn't want to interrupt you. I apologize. I really like what you're saying, and it's getting back to what Ms. Mason was asking us. So what could we do if we've, you know, maybe partially achieved our 2 goals? Well, one thing we could do is work off of Mr. Johnson's plan. This committee, because of its touch points in the schools and in the community, could name 5 questions that we want a subject matter expert to address. They can address more than that, but rather than just kind of passively receiving presentations, we can actively generate the questions. And I do think Sean just gave us a perfect example of one. What's the rate of inclusion in our schools? If the state has a target, you know, where are we at? And what's the possibility of hitting that state target?
Right, and you know, the data was wonky for a couple of years because the data was wonky for COVID, right?
Right.
But now we should have that, and it should just be in DPI. I'll see if I can get it for the, you know, 2021, 2022 school year. It may be a little delayed, but I'll see. But
Ms. Walker, if I recall, aren't we one of the only counties that counts seclusion, that keeps numbers?
We're the only county that does it.
Number of students who are in seclusion.
Oh, seclusion.
I think
so I'm not
Dr.
talking about seclusion, though. I'm talking about a
Inclusion.
separate special ed classroom versus
Inclusion
special
to
education
normal-
students
mainstreaming.
being
Yes.
included, because the
Normal-
data shows
normality.
that the data shows that there's much more instructional time and that students learn much more. So I'm not talking about seclusion or restraint, although it's a very important topic. I'm talking about just an integrated environment.
So, Ms. Mason, Ms. Walker, and Mr. McManus, I do want to interject really quick. So what you just raised, so just want to make sure we're calling out action items as they're rolling out.
Oh, sure.
Is that, one way is versus always inviting the SME to come in, that we generate those questions that I can receive, then I can push them out to the members of the senior leadership team or the divisions where they're applicable, get those answers, then that I can come back
Sure.
with
Yeah.
those answers if, in
That's
case
a
that they're
great-
not able to come in
Right.
and.
Yeah, because people are busy.
Yeah.
I mean, I respect that.
Okay.
There's a lot of stuff going on, so I definitely respect that. But definitely, I don't want to lose all the good work we did.
Right.
Just because of normal life
Understood.
turnover stuff,
So my question is, once we get these questions and we answer them, then what?
I think that's what our charge could be, because it's information. A lot of stuff is informational. It's building our knowledge because we have the questions and now we're seeking the answer. So I think it'll help inform directions that we move and recognize, is this something that we can do as an EDI committee and we could target, or is it not something we can do? So we just have to also caseload management, and we don't want to identify too many things that as a committee we can't see through. But I do think that's a great way that all of our questions is a standard operating process to get information back to us, and it really just kind of opens up that communication between the EDI committee and all the divisions of New Hanover County Schools.
That's right. And Mr. Johnson, is there a possibility to close the loop even tighter to say, okay, if we know something, 65% inclusion rate was the target, we're at 53%, who needs to know about this and develop, in a sense, an action plan to think about why we're in our current space and what the possibilities are for increasing? So somehow a feedback loop that gets this into then the administration, not just here in our committee.
And let me supplement that before we go too far, but it is in our strategic plan. It was identified in the strategic plan that you just went over, and there were actionable steps in it, but I feel like every IEP season we kind of take two steps back, because what our families and our students are seeing is not more minutes in gen ed. Typically it's more reasons why, let's go after this therapy, or let's have more time that's one-on-one, that feels really good, but the data shows that it doesn't work as
We
effectively.
need the data, and
Right,
updated
the data,
data.
right, the data does not show.
That's got to be
and-
part of any discussion. we have.
Right, so, I mean, I have an email that I sent, and it was before both of you joined EDI, so I'll just resend it so you have the latest information. But that connection would be really helpful, I think, just to make sure we're engaging the right folks now that there's been some movement.
For me, and I have a long background in special ed, the concern that I have is, I don't want to just put numbers in just to put numbers in so that we get the numbers. I want to put the kids in the classrooms if it's appropriate for them, if it's the least restrictive environment. And so I think that we really, as a district, and I've mentioned this to Ms. Varnum as well, really need to look at the IEPs and see, is this the least restrictive environment for this child? Meaning they can function well, they can learn, they can not impede the learning of anybody else, and they can, go through school. And so I really think that we have to be careful that we're not just putting numbers in, just to put numbers in so that we can get the numbers
Right,
up,
you
but
just
that
don't
we're
wanna
accurately.
drop a child in the
Exactly, we need to
classroom, right.
accurately do it and analyze if they are actually in the least restrictive environment for them individually. So that's my biggest concern with
Love
that.
that.
Follow-up question for Sean. So you said the state level is 63% or state?
65%.
State rate is
Yeah.
65? And is that what we want to aim for? But like Ms. Mason said, maybe it's not right for every child to be.
Well, I mean, right, there are definitely anecdotal situations in which it might not be right, but the research does say that, there's 40 years of research that say that outcomes are better, and mostly it's driven by there's a delta of instructional time of 20% in the general education classroom versus the typical, or versus the separate special education classroom. So it's quite a big difference, and that's regardless of type of disability too. It's just making sure, to your point, getting the proper supports where they ought to be is the challenge. And so, I'm sorry, remind me your question?
No, I was just asking you a general question
Oh, the
about
target,
the state, the state target.
Yeah, and I mean, OSEP did send out an article. It was a series of papers in like the 2018, 2019 timeframe that said that many schools, and it's not just the New Hanover County schools, but many schools are, what's the word? Over-identifying, I mean, they do use, it's this report right here. It's
Over-diagnosing?
Over the segregation of students with disabilities. So it was delivered in 2018. It was a 5-part series on IDEA and its effectiveness. I don't think there's anything unique about New Hanover County that would make data different here.
Right, okay.
So I think it's just, there's something that we could look at and figure out, are we implementing co-teaching broadly, or could we be, that sort of thing. Is it a practices thing?
I think we do. That is an area that I feel like we do, just being in special ed and having those students in my classroom and pushing into other classrooms. We do not have enough of the PDs on the co-teaching model. I'm very familiar with my students, my caseload, even the ones who are on other teachers' caseloads as well. But some of our teachers don't have the ability, the know-how. They don't have the training to go all the way and move through ECATs to be able to see all of the goals, all the accommodations, to read up on that student, to get that information. And a PD would be very helpful for those teachers because professional development. Just because in that co-teaching model with the teacher and the EC teacher, but then the teacher with that student and developing that relationship that's healthy enough where that student doesn't always have to come to me as a special ed teacher, but they can also sit there with that teacher. And then part of the inclusive part would be just making sure, and that's maybe something student voice could touch base with as well, because we've had the conversation about developing relationships with students and teachers. And trying to bridge, close that gap of teachers wanting to leave the profession altogether. But developing a better relationship with gen ed students, just like you better the relationship with special ed students. And the gen ed and special ed students can work together more to work with their teachers so they can provide curriculum that touches every student in the classroom. Like, we're not just learning about this, but we're gonna learn about this culture and this culture and this culture and this culture. So it's, and this disability and this, it's, if we could do more of that relationship building, if that makes sense to you.
Well, peer supports is an evidence-based practice.
Yes.
And peer supports is actually, and it's anecdotal, but it's written into my son's IEP, is super effective.
It is,
So,
it is. We have something similar like that at TRAS, where we have some students who actually go into our ISCS 1, ISCS 2 classes and work with those students and make them feel like a sense of belonging.
Right.
Like they have students that they can go to outside of their classroom and speak to, and it helps them socialize more, and they don't have to have someone walk with them in the hallway because they've got a peer that's their disability is different. Like it's really a great thing to do. I wish we could push that more.
Right.
Because that would be very helpful in special ed.
So that's just kind of an example. I mean, we don't have to,
Really quick.
Oh, sorry.
No.
Just listening, to everybody just so beautifully talking about this, and I would just like to share, both from my background as a special education teacher before IDEA was passed, and also as an advocate presently in New Hanover County. Where we close the gap between considering the individual needs of the child, and Sean so beautifully has advocated for years for inclusion, and Sean and I share the same passion for this, and also we're data wonks. The research is clear that the more included a child is, the better their outcomes, mental health-wise as well as academic. So the question really is how to make that happen. And that's where equity comes in.
Right.
Because equity is, like Ms. Harper so beautifully said, the buddy, the person who's going to walk with you or connect with you from the gen ed side to the special ed side. Lainey has a buddy program for the kids with, in the specially designed academics class, but that's it. And I'm working with a family whose child is in the intensive communication support class, and he needs a buddy too. And we were told, well, we only have it for this group of children. But when you're isolated and separate and apart, you don't have the models that you need, particularly in the intensive social communications class. Who's modeling for you? Where are your peers modeling how to relate? Because all the kids are struggling with the same issue. So it just reinforces the need to separate them, because as years go by, they're getting less and less exposure to the general population and what are acceptable means and methods of communicating and interacting with not just peers but also adults. And we're actually creating a self-fulfilling prophecy, which, you know, we read about back in the 60s and the 70s. So we really do have to be careful. And the way we move forward, I believe, and I've seen in practice, is using equity and accessibility. And it may mean it's going to be different for every child, and that's where we protect least restrictive environment. But the district where I served in New York, we went to full inclusion by 2001. Full inclusion throughout the entire elementary, middle, high school. All we had in terms of specially designed instruction was applied behavior analysis classes, but they were in neighborhood schools. And we had them across the district. And I was not in a wealthy, everybody thinks, wow, where did you teach? No, it was a working class school district. So the ABA classes were the kids weren't sent to a separate school. They were not in every school, obviously, but they were strategically located throughout the district. And so when they were ready, they could be mainstreamed into that school for 1 period, 2 periods, and incrementally increased. So I know, I lived it, it's possible to do. There has to be a will, and we use what we have in terms of our particular resources, but equity is the way we get there. In my opinion, that's how we bridge the gap and bring special ed and gen ed together. And we'll add just one more thing. I think we have some very well-intentioned and well-meaning general education teachers, but I believe that they need a little bit of professional development, because when we talk about equity, some teachers say, well, if I'm going to do it for this child, then I have to do it for all my students. And then the answer is, well, that's impossible. I can't do this thing for all my students. So that's sometimes a roadblock, because special ed and general ed have to work together to make this work. So I think the teachers who feel that way they believe they're advocating for all their students, but all their students don't need this particular thing. This was for one child in order to level the playing field and create the possibility for that child to spend more time in general education, if that makes sense. And one thing that I was remiss before, Jared Worthington was wonderful in helping us after we were meeting with Mr. O'Brien before he retired, and Mr. O'Brien created the handoff so that we could continue working. And Jared was wonderful, but then there came to a point where, like Malcolm said, there was no more he could do, because then it needed to be handed off to another department. So I'm not sure if that's beyond the scope of this committee, but like Malcolm said, connecting people and then maybe following through and make sure that those connections have actually taken place and there's been a response would be very helpful, because that's where we stalled. We stalled when it was time for the athletic department to get directly involved it stopped at that point.
So I want to say, I mean, I'm trying to not lose what I've been in my head for 5 minutes, but yeah, thank you. From Ms. Mason's point, and this has always been a question, I think, with this committee is, what do we have the power to do or change? I think if we can, I always thought when the board put the strategic plan together, it was a living document. It wasn't something that was solid, set in stone. If we about adjust some of our strategies, I think this committee would probably do well to invite the conversation, look at the data, and I still think we can make recommendations. I think we should to the full board, or to whatever, I think it's more powerful to do it to the full board, honestly, in committee reports, because I feel like it's something that we all come together to, we have a great care for it, and we're gonna do the research on it, and we're gonna say, hey, this is where we're lacking, this is where we should be putting our attention, and hopefully, I mean, in the end, I think you know how it works on the board. It's like everything's tied to a budget or a division. But this, I think, crosses a lot of divisions.
Yeah, this is it's more practices
Yeah.
almost, not necessarily. I mean, there's of course the special education, and we, they've been great. Dr. Jones, before she left, collaborated with us, and Ms. Farnham did as well. And so it's just and it could be just because that position is not filled yet too, but how can we continue that conversation?
I like the points that everyone is making, but going back to what Ms. Walker just said, this is a living document, and I feel that it is an outdated living document. I feel that there are items in here, if you know anything about our budget, where the district's going, and everything that has been prioritized, within, this is not our only strategic item. There are 6 other items so the district is working on those congruently at the same time that we are working on equity. And I feel that one of our tasks and one of our initial action steps should be going through what our steps are, going through what our tactics are, identifying what we've already accomplished, and updating what we want to accomplish. Because some of these things are we have them for being accomplished at the end of this school year. They're going to take until 2027, maybe, if even that is possible. So I think one thing we really need to do is remember that this is a living document, and I don't know what the steps are to updating the strategic plan document, but maybe if the board can, if you 3 board members can help us identify that way we can go in here and mark out the items we've done, readjust some of the items that we're looking at. Let's start taking those 5 questions that we develop each meeting and pitching those to Malcolm to give to senior leadership, getting those answered, and inputting that data as we're getting it, so that we can move forward with each item and each tactic as we go along.
I like that.
Very systematic.
We need to look at every single thing we have done or have suggested. When we started 2 years ago, I said we need to prioritize, whether it's 50 or 5 things, that at least we know we're focused on that all the time.
Yes.
So we need to receive input. We need to list all the things that we should be considered, not that we're going to eliminate, but that we're prioritized. And our job is to keep that up here as much as possible. And I'm assuming your job is to go into the community and help us make and see and what's going on there. But we've talked about student voices. They need to present every time to the board. That keeps them up here. We need someone here to represent this group, E.D.I.
She's the chair. Committee reports, and
She was so
you as
excited
well,
about
but
that.
No, you're right,
But that she would say what we're doing and what our focus and priorities.
So,
We need, whether we like it or not, we need to look at all those issues and then agree or disagree to finally make a priority. But the student summit, the leadership, that's something that we need to discuss. We need, as a group, to make a decision on what that is or what it isn't. We need professional development. If that's something we want to recommend, that we need to improve in the areas that you suggested, particularly with the inclusive part, the relationships, et cetera, and then your background. So if we don't prioritize, then we don't know what we have to focus on the most.
Yeah.
We don't have, how many equity How many schools have an equity team?
This is
Anybody know?
action item to look at.
Correct.
And right now, just our high.
When's the last time?
Our traditional high school, our high schools and our middle schools.
They all have.
But right now, and that's what the newly named student engagement team that Abby and Brian are working on. And we saw a lot of those members that came out to their student leadership summit from the schools. That's how we were able to get those students. It was those leaders from the schools that brought
Do
those
you go
students
to
out.
the schools and talk to anyone about that? Something of the.
No, so all my communication, and that's a part of what we should be doing next week. So our next meeting should be one singular agenda item, which is our strategic plan and going through those items, because that opens up the question of what you're going to, is where the student engagement team land in this. So I think I don't want to have that conversation now, but I think that should be a priority in making sure that they're brought into that, so we don't run into that same issue that we just overcame. But I do want to give space for you, Ms. Lena. I know you have something you want to say?
That's, let me see if I can articulate what I've been thinking through all the
I know.
conversation. It's, I think what we are missing action on this group. Right now, the ones that have been here from the beginning, we have had so many routes taken already. And there is so much work that is halfway done. We have been prioritizing goals. We went to the 5 pillars of equity, diversity, and inclusion. We create needs assessments. We created different goals with timelines that I think we can align with the strategic plan. That was our intention when everything changed directions. And then we work more strategically on the student voice, and then we work on creating the office for equity and then waiting for the office to establish. But I think we are at a good point now where we can combine all the previous work that we have been doing, aligning with the strategic plan and the action steps that are there, and then prioritize, as Mr. Magano said, get one goal and creating a timeline for that goal, and then we can be visible in the community through those reports and through those things. Because right now we come and we don't have, other than a student voice that is amazing and we're doing so great, we don't want to feel that all the work is only on you, because it's not only on you. We all want to be part of that in the way that we can participate and be active from all the expertise that we bring in. So, but I think if we have, as you said, prioritize reading the strategic, and that reading and alignment might take us a couple of sessions, because there is a lot of information that is worth taking and deciding, okay, this is great, but what takes priority right now? I think what Sean has been working on for a long time is worth revising and giving the next steps, because there was a really strong committee working on that for a long time. A lot of information reviewed and all of the things that they are in a good place. I also had a mental health plan that I started and created a timeline for, that is also, all of this is related to inclusion and equity because comes from the pillars. We are not working from just things that we like to see. It's all aligned to a bigger plan that needs to connect with the strategic plan that is the county guidelines. So I think we need to get to more action and specific coming from there. I think it's nice that we're finally coming to this conversation.
Caressa question, and to your point, all our work that we did on that Google document, is that still accessible?
I should be able to pull all of that
So I
up
think
and
I'll
share
share
it.
it.
And Lena, to your point, I agree, we need action items, but I feel like sometimes we say that as if we have not had
We've had
action
some
steps, or
successes.
as if we have not accomplished anything. I'm just gonna take some time and I'm gonna run through what our strategic plan, strategies, and goals and tactics are, and then so we can hear and see where we are. But I think we can't move forward because we have roadblocks. We need professional development for our teachers to bring in general ed teachers to special education teachers. Our teachers are burned out on professional development right now. If we say Mr. McManus, Ms. Walker, and Ms. Mason take to the board that we make a recommendation that we put another professional development on teachers for equity, how is that going to be received?
Yeah, I hear
And
you.
I
And then
don't
if
want-
we say, hey, we need additional
Hold on.
budget or funding, we need additional budget or funding to make this go, how is that going to be received when we're cutting positions too?
Yeah.
So I still feel that we need to take a look at this strategic plan, take a look at these tactics to see, hey, what from this can we do and what from this are we going to need to adjust our timeline to 25, 26, 26, 27. I don't think that stops us from moving forward or completing those action items. And again, we have seen several action items, and there are several things right now that I can go and put like a green block on for this, that this work has been able to do. I just think at any time during a project, you have to regroup, you have to realign, and you have to see what you actually can afford to do. And right now, the district, afford-wise, that's a tight piece.
And I'm not the person that says we need to do this and get ready to make recommendations. For us to have a serious conversation about inclusion, we need to consider if we are ready to change schedules, for example, because we need to give planning time to both teachers, and that is not easy to make. Changing the schedule and the mindset, we need to train parents to understand that inclusion is the way to go when half of the teachers and half of the students, the parents, think that the students are better served if they are out of that regular setting. So it's not an easy, I'm not saying that with specific examples, I'm just saying that we need to define what our goal is, our next step, and give them the time to process and to consider all the different experts that need to be invited for us to be able to have a plan in place and then consider how that plan is going to be integrated. Yeah, I don't want to rush, and I don't also, please don't take like I'm saying we are not doing much or we are not accomplishing much. I just want us to move forward with a plan in mind, with a clear direction based on the strategic plan that we
Real
already
stuff that
created.
comes out of the committee, because that's what we really need to be doing. We don't want to just come and keep meeting, like I know I've heard plenty of times. We do, and we enjoy our conversations, but we want to turn them into actionable items. And if not, if they're actionable to us, we can only recommend and say this is what's needed. You know, the board or the people that give us the money has to be the ones that understand this is what we need.
I think one of our action items today before we leave here at 6 o'clock, 6:30 should be, what are the 5 questions you guys want answered from special education that we could take to our interim special ed director, or we can take to Julie Varnum, and we can have those 5 questions answered and brought back at our next meeting.
What do you think, Ms.
I don't
Mason?
think taking the time to come up with 5 questions should be taxing for
Come up with the
today.
questions, but maybe our next meeting be about looking at the strategic plan.
Well, yeah, and
the
we can still
priorities.
also have those.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And I do want to, I've heard, and I share the concern, certainly about budget, certainly with the Port City News article that came out. You know, it concerns me, obviously, that we can't apply the full amount of budget just to the EC program. But I do want to note that, like, inclusion doesn't actually cost more. There's a perception that it does. It is more of a logistics challenge, and that's where a lot of the conversation had been going. It was like co-teaching practices are one thing, and we can certainly roll that out and talk about that, but that the logistics is one of the challenges right now, and so that's a different conversation than cost. And so
When I said cost, I was thinking about other
Yeah,
action
right.
items that we want.
Got
Like,
it.
we
Okay.
have maybe 4 or 5 action items that go with hiring 2 extra people in equity. So like
Right.
those things we can't.
Yeah,
necessarily
those
move
things,
forward.
yep, understood. Okay.
Well, we gave a lot of conversation to that. So the next item on the agenda is a student voice work session.
So I put a work session in just in case students came, because they typically, and especially with this meeting, they reported at the school board meeting, and whatever feedback that they received after that meeting, this would be an opportunity for us to really take time to work with them and work through things. But they're not here, so we don't have to necessarily always have that 30 minutes, but I just want to make sure they're on here for that time. If it's not used, that's completely okay. But did you want to take some time to give any update or any questions for us that we should?
No, they're really interested on working with Empowered and kind of restructuring that to get information out so that they can adjust it more to student voice.
Okay, and also what Empowered is a newsletter that through the collaboration with community communication and outreach division was a newsletter. Is actually, we were piloting, we were really trying to figure out who the target audience was for this newsletter. It is on my website. It wasn't announced because we're still playing with what does it look like, and now with this new structure that we're working on, I think it would be in the best interest for Student Voices to take over that empowered newsletter. So it's that student-led organization with this student-led point of communication for their peers. So I think what we can also plan for is them potentially drafting what it will look like, and showing us. Then we just kind of work through that to maybe consistently start putting it out in August. So we really work through what the template looks like, what information we want to share, what are the things we want to highlight, because we really want to make sure we have some information. This is just for Student Voices, that they have some type of distribution out into the community, regardless of regarding what they have working on. So that's why this is the first time you all are hearing about that newsletter.
Yeah. They are really excited about that. They're like super stoked, and I'm glad that you already have that in place for them to work on. But not to speak for Brian and Abby, I'm not gonna take a lot of time at all, but the summit that the students went to, Student Voice was a part of that, and they attended, and it was just really great. Just being there myself, a lot of students were so excited. They wanted the full day, instead of just the half of the time. They could not wait to have this next year. Just the speakers, the energy, listening to other students in different schools share their voice about what's going on in their school, and none of it was negative. It was just, hey, this is going on here, and we'd like to see more of this, or we'd like to change this structure, or we'd like to implement this. It was all really positive. I wish everybody could have attended, and some of our EC students were there as well. So just that whole mesh of just good melting pot of ideas and backgrounds and cultures and experiences. It was beautiful. I can't wait till next year, and I can't wait till Student Voice gets ready to for their kickoff coming up, in the next school year. So it was beautiful.
So I just have a quick question. That's great.
Yeah.
And this is the third time this has happened?
This was our second.
Massive success, right? This is something that has a county-wide reputation for being really successful. It's budget season. Will there be a line item in the budget going forward to support this? It's not a lot of money.
I hope so.
And that's a part of the conversation.
Yeah, transportation and food, will there, yeah,
I can tell you that our present budget, we haven't heard, but we haven't been shared. County commissioners, what they will do, they obviously support us in a lot of good ways. 700 teacher positions. But to answer your question, right now, our budget, we had a little talk about that today, about we don't have the money at this point. So, and we don't have this, EDI does not have a budget. So I think that's something we do need to discuss so that we won't get in the same situation this year trying to find funds to get the kids down there.
I think that's the beauty too of this entire group, just EDI itself, is that we can all get together and creatively come up with unique ways to make things work by reaching out to people.
And check it off the list.
Reaching out to different partners and agencies, and like Marissa was saying, like reviewing this strategic plan and seeing what is good, what we need to get rid of, what we need to add, how we need to revise it, I think is a great next step for this committee.
And just one more point for Student Voice. We did help them build their website, so they have that up, running, and live. If you go to divisions and go to Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, then once you're on that page, Student Voice has a tab there, and they have a whole website that lists their members. It has their mission statement on, a student mission statement that they got to me, Student Voice norms that they will follow, as well as their video updates from board meetings on what they present to the board will also be on there. So any student looking to get more information, or any community family members looking to know what Student Voice is up to, all that information is on their website now.
And what Crest done with the website, and as other organizations or small task force that come out, EDI committee come to fruition and legitimize, a landing spot on that website too. So student voice just really carved out that path of just visibility. So anything else that we knew that we established, any organizations or committees, same thing. Because when you guys, depending on committee, come up to do a report, we want to have all that, and we want it to be as accessible to anybody who's confused about the work that's what's taking place.
Right.
So I think they set the standard for it, but we just continue using that for any other thing that comes out of this committee.
Excellent. Yeah, and I do think it's smart to highlight all the good stuff that has gone on. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, you're good. I just kind of wanted to point out that they have changed the names of the equity teams.
Got it.
They are now student engagement teams, not student equity
Student
teams.
engagement teams, okay.
Yes.
That's a good name.
Did you say that, say that one more time?
Student engagement teams.
Not student equity teams, student engagement teams.
Did I say student equity?
No,
It's
it
not-
just,
no, no.
they used to. You're fine.
Okay, I'm like, oh, wait, did I? Sometimes I slip up. It's okay.
Yeah.
Student engagement.
Melissa, that's different than the school improvement teams?
Yeah.
Yes.
It is, okay,
Yes.
okay, cool. Thank you.
Well, thank you for sharing that. The next item on the agenda is disproportionality, big word, in schools, and information
So-
regarding that.
Yes, on the agenda is only 5 minutes from that, because recognizing it's imperative that when we're having this discussion around disproportionality, that it's not just black male students, it's black male students with disabilities.
Yes.
So it's very essential that we have EC Director Ms. Souza present for these type of discussions, so which is why I didn't want to open the gate, because I wanted to be sure that we have accurate information, the most up-to-date information, and we are aware of what our capacity is to support that effort. Because one thing I can tell you, student support services, this is high on their priority list. And just, well, I can go into what I was going to share. The information that you all saw at the school board meeting was already in front of the principals during their March professional development. Julie Varnum, Glenn Locklear, and myself had 3 small breakout sessions with all the principals where they engaged. And what you saw, that those charts, that came out of that March meeting if I'm not mistaken, the March meeting with the principals. But just that getting into the grid of disproportionality, we have to have those people at the table with us. So I just want to, I put it on there because it was asked to be, but I just want to make sure we are not carrying conversation without having those folks
Can
here.
I just say something, Ms. Mason? I was very, 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 very happy to see that conversation had and the information put up there and us owning that, because I know I talked about it probably really early on, long time ago. The data speaks for itself. It is, according to our district, we're worse in the state. I think we're the highest. in
We're the only one identified.
Unidentified. I mean, I don't know, okay, I don't want to take words out of Julie's mouth, but I was very appreciative of the presentation, because one of the work that got put in it, to the care, and 3, that there's acknowledgement.
Acknowledgement.
Yes, and I mean, Denise says, you look at the data, you cannot ignore the problem. And we really have to address it, and I hope it's one of our plans. I know you guys are already working on it, which I'm very, very grateful for, but I think the only way we make changes is if we acknowledge it and we figure out how to do it. And that's the first step, and the district did a big thing, in my opinion, doing that. And getting the feedback from the principals was huge for me.
Yeah, I thought the feedback was
Oh my gosh,
very value added.
Anybody can look at it who's listening, go to the last board meeting assembly, it's on there.
And one thing I can add to that, remember the column when they listed out the root causes and the potential strategies? The Student Support Service Division have already identified those strategies and how they're going to intentionally, started this past March, but especially during the Principal Summer Institute and throughout the professional development for the next academic year, embedding those best practices and strategies into already planned professional development. So the plan to address those items is already in play, and they're already working on tackling this
I
issue.
think we need to push that out to the community, because people are asking, well, what are we doing? And along with that, we need to be tracking the data. As we're implementing what we feel are best practices, we're not going to know if they are unless we can actually chart progress or lack thereof. We put out a lot of great programs. And me particularly, and a lot of the folks that I'm working with, we're real disappointed that the professional development, the professional behavioral development, positive intervention, professional learning community PLC, it's a lot, big, long thing, that Ms. Farnham put into place with the first cohort of schools that were identified just with this discussion in disproportionate numbers of suspensions that ran for 1 year, and then it ended. It was supposed to go into a second and possibly a third year, and the second cohort of schools was identified, and that program has stopped. So again, there's a lot of good intentions, there's a lot of good programs. I'm identifying one of New Hanover County's problems is lack of follow-through on good ideas and programs that somehow just get halfway and they don't go to completion. And as far as professional development, now we're talking about we came right back around, and inclusion is one of the ways to deal with this problem effectively and help kids with their behavior, so we can build all of what we were talking about into, as you said, existing professional development. And it doesn't always have to be a formal PD. It can be EC case managers and liaisons working with their teams in their schools when they regularly meet. It doesn't, we can find a way. If we're all, and we are, this committee is committed, we can find a way. We can use the resources we have, the great people and the talented personnel that we have, and the procedures that are in place, and incorporate what we're talking about and move it forward.
Thank you.
I just think there's a lot of intersectionality
Yep.
too with this, and so I'm thrilled that some of it's being incorporated into PD, and I do think that will help, just the holistic kind of concern about separate environment that we were just talking about.
So I think the last item on the agenda is the EDI committee announcement.
So the only announcement that I received was the New Hanover County Schools Advisory Council for Exceptional Children, parents as partners in the IEP process, is hosting an event Thursday, May 18th from 7:30 to 8:30 via Zoom. This is something you shared with us if you want to provide additional context.
There's been a change.
Yeah, I'll provide some context. So this was the advisory committee that you are also the chair of, which we very much appreciate. We had put together a Zoom that was, it had 3 separate focus areas for partnering with parents, and it was going to be held on Thursday, May 18th. There has been a concern identified that we don't have an ESL translator to put it into Spanish, and we don't have moderators that can facilitate the breakouts with translation as well. So until we understand and can line up that logistics support, maybe that's something this committee can help us with, and we can draw on our networks. But the turnaround time for that is kind of fast, so there's some concern that because we don't have that support and can't make it an equitable event, we may need to delay it till later. So that.
How many are needed?
What's that?
How many interpreters are needed?
3. It would be 3. It would be 1 for the content itself, but then 3 during the actual meeting to facilitate.
Well, is it simply Spanish speaking?
It would simply be Spanish
Because
speaking.
are there
Yeah.
deaf parents? Are there, because
Right.
we have multilingual, we have a lot of
We have a lot of-
multilingual.
right.
And it's not just Spanish speaking, it's not just deaf, it's not just, there's a lot. So it's really finding, who is wanting to come.
Who
and then-
registers.
Yeah,
Who
when we
registers,
identify
and
the
then-
registrants, then we'll be
And then
able to-
finding their needs as far as
Yep.
communication
And
issues.
maybe this is an opportunity to potentially explore not necessarily people, but possible platforms that may be able to help supplement
Yep.
what we don't have. And if there's a cost or if it's a free platform, but just seeing what we can have, because we can't meet every need, but just really showing that there's a due diligence there. So, I
Right.
mean, that's something we can just.
Like closed caption.
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
think for.
That's
Transcript
perfect.
writing,
Yeah.
yeah.
So there is the potential that sadly that would get delayed, because I think it would be a great event, and especially it's IEP season. But if it gets delayed, so we can get like the technology and a couple more key people, and that's
Do it
fine
right.
too.
Sean,
Well,
my
I want you guys to-
understanding
so-
from that email was that it is delayed. Ms.
Okay.
Souza pretty much said that she wanted,
she
she
can't.
advised to
Right.
postpone it to the opening of school.
Yeah, I mean, May 18th is not
So I
that
do
far
want
away, so.
to lift up a platform.
Yeah.
I experienced it for the very first time at
Okay.
an equity officers meeting. It was called Otter
Okay.
AI, and Otter.ai, and what it did, it joined the Zoom meeting with that person
Okay.
and live transcribed the meeting. So
Okay.
if that person couldn't make it, it joined. So I haven't seen the output of it yet. I know it exists, so I will have to ask an individual to show me what the notes were. But I think if that is a function, there also might be a translate function, and a closed caption function. So which be able to leverage that. So I do want to uplift Otter.ai, OTTER.ai. I have not personally played with it, but I want to encourage you guys to play with it and see and let's get some feedback, because that may be a platform that we can
That
probably
would be
leverage in the meantime.
Great idea.
Yeah, I love it. Yes, I took the note, thank you.
Put that in that note there too.
Yep.
And I think that to kind of close things off, we should do our 5 questions. So what are our 5 questions that we're wanting to ask?
Is it in one subject area? Are we focusing on special education, or are we, is it
I
general?
think it would be intentional to
Focus
focus
on-
it
Pick a
right
focus,
now.
let's stick with it.
Yeah.
5 questions, and we want to call it special education.
Right, so right now the intended target maybe just to, I can connect with Ms. Souza
Great.
on these
Yeah.
questions to see what I can.
So what are these questions?
I mean, I think my first 2 questions would be, you know, what actions are we taking to help close that gap? And then my second question would
Close
prob-
what gap?
Oh, I'm sorry, to close the gap between the 53% and the 65% target.
The inclusion rate.
Like, the inclusion rate. And this is called the LRE ratio, is what DPI calls it.
Least restricted.
Yep. And I mean, I personally see, like Lena said, not every parent wants it, but a lot of parents want it, and it does not feel easy to get for one's child. And then the second question I would say there was a service grid update, and like some locations and services had changed. And I actually think it's
Service or surface?
service.
Service,
Yeah,
yeah.
service grid. So the program descriptions are all on the website, but where the programs are located have changed between the 2021 and 2022 to 2023 school year, or maybe it's next year. But anyways, just a communication or something on that. I actually think that the updates are good in terms of, like, for the big picture. It's just a little disruptive, you know, for families that may have to move schools again, things like that.
So just, can you provide an update of the service grid?
Right, or just a communication on it. I think, like, I was surprised, and technically, like, it could change the least restrictive environment for families. Like, I don't want to change what I have, but like some parents may want to do that. And so just kind of going into their IEPs knowing that those, you know, those are available in perhaps their home school district now could be really helpful. So just maybe some sort of communication or something on, I think a lot of the challenges can be solved with communication. And then,
I think we would need to know if any school is doing like this model of an inclusive model, and if it's been successful, what data
Question?
are they collecting? Yeah.
Okay. can you say
Is
that
there
one
a
more
new
time?
school doing inclusion
Any
model?
school.
Any school.
And
Any
what data do
Yeah.
they have?
Uh-huh.
That's good. Can we get a request for data to see how we're doing with reaching the goals from like baseline, from where we started, when we were cited by the state, where we were at, and then, this is a number of years later now, how are we doing? Where are we in that closing the LRE gap? You know, I think data is going to help drive us forward too. If we get data, we'll be able to come up with plans and ideas and strategies. We're sort of, I feel like we're trying to find the light. You know,
Yeah.
we're all struggling to get to the light, and the light really is where did we start? The reason that we were cited was because we were not just a point or two below, we were significantly below. So where are we now? And there's another thing, I don't know if you want to add it or not. While Dr. Jones was here, she was working very hard to do this one simple thing, and I think Lena alluded to it, about scheduling, and the key and the trick is not that hard, it's a change in mindset. Instead of doing the EC kids in their classes last, you do them first. I was in
That's the
charge of
best
scheduling in my
practice
building.
across the country,
It
right.
changes
Yeah.
everything, and it's
Just a
not hard.
question.
It's just a change of
Can we-
mindset.
It's like, could we do this?
Okay.
Perhaps, yeah.
She was
Okay.
pushing very
Can we
hard for that.
schedule
Right.
EC students first on the master schedule?
Yes,
Yeah, on the
exactly.
master schedule, and I agree. I have attended for the past, I don't know, 5-6 years, the National Down Syndrome Conference, and the two takeaways were like that master schedule ends up being really important, and the schools who do it best have the EC kids first, and then kind of like it catches even more at-risk kids, socioeconomic, it catches more kids, so it really is a net win. And the number one predictor, and this is the most kind of telling statistic for me, but the number one predictor of a child with a disability's success in an inclusive environment has nothing to do with like race, ethnicity, if they've got money, anything. The number one predictor is simply if the administration wants it, if the administration is
Political
supportive.
will.
So
Right.
let me ask a question, Sean, because I know you have a lot of knowledge and you have circulated very good information. And I remember some documents coming around a couple of summers ago. Rather than just focus on one of the best practices, do we have a list of best practices for inclusive teaching? And other areas, and could one of our questions be, could our interim special, or what is the title of this person who's
You
coming?
were saying it right, in terms of.
Yeah, and she's
Okay,
great.
interim
She's
director of
awesome.
special education could come and talk to us about the proportion of schools meeting each of these best practices,
I like that.
right? So
That's
something
a
a little
great
more
idea.
That's a great
comprehensive.
idea.
So if we're wanting her to come talk to us, then do we need the 5 questions?
Well, we want to send those ahead of time and
I
ask
think
her.
we are
She's not
going
just
too
coming blind.
deep into this, and we are just trying to explore what the status of the
Yeah.
county right now. We cannot be that aggressive with those
Yeah.
specific questions, because she's gonna,
Doing best practice.
Yeah,
are we
that's
in
what I was
camera? I
wondering,
cannot
just
say
like-
the word, but she's gonna panic.
Yeah.
And then we need to explore how the inclusion, if the inclusion is being done in the county, if we have a rate of success or some data that is, tell us that we're going in the right direction, how we attempting to close the gap that we say. And from there, we
And then
can
after
decide.
those questions, we
Yeah,
can invite her later.
And then we can say, if there's, okay, the EC department needs a more structured plan, how can we work on a suggestion, a recommendation? But if we start knowing that, like, well, okay, we think the county should do this,
Yeah, right,
and she's not
right.
ready to do it right now,
Yeah.
she's interim. So, well, I think we need to start very easy collecting this general data to see, there might be big efforts that we don't know of, and it just didn't take fruit to
probably a lot I don't
fruition
know about.
because this and this and this happened. And then we can just get, oh, this is where we are right now.
Yeah.
So let's talk and let's see, who else do we need to invite? What other is this budget? Is just a scheduling matter now? Because changing schedules, guys, I am in that business. It is
Yeah, I'm,
Nightmare.
huge.
Yeah, I'm not
And
trying
people
to
fight
pretend
it
it's a
with
simple
their
task.
teeth because
Yeah.
they are so used to seeing it one way, that if we are thinking of changing the mindset into an inclusion model, which is our goal, we need to determine little baby steps from example. This school is being successful. Tell us how they did it. Of course, they are going to tell us. They changed the schedule to work with planning periods with the homeroom teacher, the gen ed teacher, and the EC teacher. They decided on what model they wanted. They want a more a co-teaching model, or they want a more a teacher and an assistant model with the planning together to support. There are so many ways to do it that we need to see what is that they try first,
What's working.
and what worked. And if it didn't work, they say, no, we tried it. I know a couple of schools have tried it. Are they still working on that or no? Why not? Why they did? So things like that, very exploration, so we can come as not threatening to them, and they can give us all the information that we want.
All right, so I have 4 questions, just in the interest of time. Can we get that 5th question?
The fifth one was best practices, right? What are our best practices and what portion of schools are using best
I
practices?
think we're gonna hold off.
I have that as.
The 4th question?
Didn't we ask what is the rate of inclusion in our schools?
Okay, so the questions I have first are, what efforts are we taking to close the gap in the inclusion rate?
Action.
I have, can you provide an update communication on the new service grid? Is there any school doing an inclusion model, and is there any data to provide?
Master scheduling.
Can we schedule EC students first within the master schedule?
And then the list of best practices, right?
I think the best practice, see, the scheduling, the master schedule is a best practice. So maybe what we really just want to know is, first of all, the documents that Sean has access to are actually in the hands of our interim director, right? They're being used as guideposts, and maybe just an update, because I like what Lena was saying.
That's true. That might be something that got lost in the turnover.
So it's a missing step, right?
Right.
Like, if we want the district to be responsible for moving in this direction, they have to see what the federal guidelines are for moving in that direction. And I love what Lena said. We're trying to foster a culture of urgency around data use, but not panic.
Right.
There's no one person who caused our problems, right? So as we look at data, and this is particularly true in special ed because of the legal ramifications, there may be things that the district doesn't present.
Yeah, a bunch.
May I make a suggestion?
Yeah, yes, you may.
Have a little bit of background in that.
Yeah.
Of course, now the computer's been so far advanced. When I was around, if you got 60%, shut it down and did the other 40 by hand. And then it got better and better. But now, we have 3 high schools that are well over capacity.
Okay.
I think Hoggar's what, 300, 350? If you move to the district, of course, you get to go there, but you can't unless you do an IB, get approved. So, because like a lot of people like to shop, of course. My point is, I would suggest that, Malcolm, you go visit at least 1 or 2 of the high school principals,
Okay.
ASAP, and ask them their thoughts and their rationale of how the scheduling of these students first, what their thoughts are about that, how that affects their scheduling or does not.
Okay, and I think that's an opportunity to invite the
Because they're
principals
doing it,
in.
they're beginning to do it as
Yeah.
we speak.
Oh,
Next
scheduling for
year,
next year, yeah.
you start ASAP, they're doing it right now, I assure you.
So if we wanted to do it.
All right, so 5th question?
Did we?
Or do we just want 4?
I think we just.
There was maybe a pre-question to the first one, which is, what is the current rate right now
yeah.
of
Yeah,
inclusion?
that
The
was
LRE, what is the current rate?
Current rate.
Because that's something, we are hoping it's higher than 53%.
Yeah, maybe it's improved, and that's what a lot of
Or he
what,
doesn't think so.
what I hear through the advisory council, and what Denise probably hears through
say,
SEPTA,
sorry?
but I'm not privy to, is anecdotal in nature. And so I wanna, like, maybe it is indeed increasing, and that would be great, but I would love to see something different from 2018 and 2019.
And then what was that acronym?
LRE.
LRE.
Least restrictive
Yeah.
environment.
Least restrictive environment.
So every IEP, just because maybe not everybody knows this, and it's where the data is going to come from, every IEP has general ed minutes and special ed minutes.
Yeah.
And that's where the data comes from. It comes from each individual IEP. You do not have to reveal any sort of confidentiality to pull, that's how they're reporting to the state. So most likely, they have everything that we're looking for, they already have. They'll have it certainly for last year. I don't know where they would be in the data collection for this year. But again, don't have to reveal confidentiality, don't have to reveal any identifying information. It's just purely minutes. It's minutes in general ed versus minutes in special ed, and that has to be documented on every single IEP.
All right, Mr. Johnson, board members, I sent those 5 questions to you so that they can go to our interim special education director. Mr. Johnson, when you have time.
So, Ms.
Can you
Mason
send
and
those
Mr.
out to
Johnson?
us as well,
sorry?
Can you send it out to the committee, the 5 questions? Thank you.
Yeah, Ms. Mason and Mr. Johnson, something worked really well at this meeting. And so I don't know what you've done, what kind of planning and organization you put together before the meeting, but I think something worked really well. Do other people think something worked really well here? So thank you for that hard work.
We'll get you some more
So that's a,
jelly beans. She loves jelly beans.
I like
Jelly
jelly.
Oh, do you jelly bellies? Jelly bellies?
This is not
You're gonna get a
the,
ton.
not the Bean Boozled.
Yeah, I don't like
do
that.
that.
I don't know what
my
beans
chair
are.
back like I did today.
It's like the
so
Harry
they
Potter
share jelly beans.
So did you want to, on this time, just want to wrap us up so we can jump back into the jelly bean?
I have one.
I have one interjection.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, because we didn't cover it, and I didn't want to stop the flow of this good conversation that we were having about special education. The parent work group, we didn't give an update on that, and that should be under our umbrella too.
And that's, and I'm so happy you mentioned that. And that's another thing for next meeting we have to take in consideration, because again, the parent work group was something that was started way before I got here. So getting it off the ground, detraction was gone of even the last one that was scheduled. Only one person RSVP'd for the meeting, so the meeting did not take place. So I think now, once we go back into this restructuring, and recognizing that there are the parent academy and other things, just making sure that we're not stretching our parents thin with different parent organizations, that we can streamline as much. But that's just something we can put on the agenda to discuss.
Solid.
But yes.
Perfect. One thing before you do wrap, and we kind of touched on it with the best practices conversation, but there were two teachers that were like highly effective co-teachers, and I do think it was at Myrtle Grove Middle, and so if we wanted to bring in those to help like kind of start the conversation, those folks, they may be very willing to. They were super, super helpful when we were working with Mr. O'Brien.
Okay.
Sean, now, I'm glad you brought up Myrtle Grove, because they're the banner, one of the banner schools, only 67 or 68 in the country.
I thought that was
For-
Murray.
I'm sorry, Murray, you're right, we should bring in Murray, that's what I meant. We should bring in Murray and discuss
Dorian,
with
do you have
them.
anything to say? You've
Yeah,
been
he had
here
his hand up.
quietly, so-
I told you to come up here, we can't hear you.
Thank you.
I really just would like to know when this committee will come up with something that is tangible and doable and effective within the next 2 to 3 months.
We're gonna work on that.
I
We
mean,
have
I
to have a
understand all
discussion
you
on
guys have your questions and your opinions and your data, but honestly, we also have to remember that kids are going through school right now in this current condition, in this current state, and I just feel like sometimes bringing in more people when we already have the present data, we already know our situation, that we should try to hone in, focus in on low-hanging fruit that can fix our problems sooner rather than later. I'm not trying to say that what's happening here isn't good, but what I am trying to remind everyone is that kids are going through this every single day. And I just feel like that we should walk away from these meetings knowing that we did one thing that will change somebody tomorrow. That's all.
And I think that's something that we addressed, I don't know when you came in, but really, what is the action that this committee is going to be taking? And that was the question I had and that I sent out to the group. So I thank you all for the awesome discussion, for the information, and hopefully next meeting we'll be able to get some stuff done.
Yeah.
But thank you all for coming and.
Yes, more dirt next time.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Yes, if you're providing, Mr. McKinnon, if you're providing.
Good.
Thank you.